Hi, everybody. This is lecture 20, Decolonization and Civil Rights Movements. Remember, this will be under week 5 lectures, okay? So let's get started. So I want to talk about decolonization through the experiences of these different leaders and their respective countries, okay? So I'm going to talk about Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana. Then I'm going to talk about India, the Indian National Congress, and Gandhi. Then I want to talk about Vietnam and Ho Chi Minh, okay, to examine decolonization. Then I want to talk about civil rights in the U.S., and I'm going to focus on, your book doesn't mention them, but I'm going to focus on the Porters, okay, to show you how a group of African-American individuals played a crucial role. They're not as famous as civil rights leaders like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, but I want to make the case that these Porters played a vital role in the rise of the civil rights movement in the U.S. Okay, so let's get started. In the last lecture, I talked about Bretton Woods, the Truman Doctrine, and the Marshall Plan. So make sure you review them. Your book also mentioned them, so make sure you understand what they are. Okay. Now, I also talked about Japan, Korea, and the Cold War. And I tried to make the case that part of the reason why they industrialized, why they were able to reindustrialize, was because of these U.S. military forces and a type of U.S. subsidy, okay? Because the U.S. needed military forces in the region, both in Japan and in Korea. They stationed a large number of soldiers, Marines, Air Forcemen, the Navy personnel, and they had infrastructure bases, okay? So those troops bought goods in those countries. So in a sense, the U.S. was subsidizing Japan and Korea. But like everything in history, there are positives and negatives, okay? And part of the negatives is you have a large amount at the beginning, again, mostly young men. And so Korean women, Japanese women will be affected, okay, because of that. So just remember that. Make sure you listen to the previous lecture, lecture 19. Now, for today's lecture on decolonization, I want us to look again at these hierarchies, okay? So again, think of these colonies, European colonies in Asia, in Africa, and think about Cuba as well, okay? What happened in Cuba? You're going to have Fidel Castro, his brother Raul Castro, and Che Guevara, okay? Remember what happened there. Remember how they're going to be an example of this middle tier, okay? Cuba was colonized all the way up until 1898, the Spanish-American War, and then the U.S. is going to maintain forces until like the early 1900s, okay? And then you could argue that Cuba was economically colonized. Havana, Cuba was Vegas before there was a Vegas. And actually, Vegas was modeled after Havana, Cuba, where Americans from the U.S. South would go gamble. Okay, it was a getaway city because they had gambling and other activities. Okay, that people mostly from the South, but also from other parts of the U.S. would go to. Okay, and Cubans are definitely going to build up resentment against these American tourists because they're primarily from the South. Cuba was almost evenly divided between Afro-Cubans and white Cubans. Who do you think that the Americans from the South are going to favor? Which Cubans are going to benefit the most from Americans traveling to Cuba? And that's part of the impetus, part of the push for the Cuban Revolution, this communist revolution. Again, at first, Raul Castro, Fidel Castro's brother, was definitely a communist. So was Che Guevara. Okay. Then Fidel Castro is going to come out as communist, and I mentioned what happened in the island. So keep that in mind. Okay. After World War II, the European powers suffer a lot. And what's going to end up happening is, remember I talked about these tiers? Let me go to the next one. These tiers are the elites. In European colonies, you tend to have a number of European elites occupying the highest political and economic positions in these colonies, okay? The B level, these middle groups, tend to be Europeanized people. Europeanized Africans in African colonies, Europeanized Asians in Asian colonies. And what I mean by Europeanized is that these Africans, these Asians, are going to get European educations. And they're going to they're going to become the leaders of the independence movements after World War II. Okay, so keep that in mind. And at the lowest tier, you tend to have less assimilated Africans, less assimilated Asians, and people from the East Indies. Okay, so keep that in mind. Could they pass? Most times they couldn't. Again, we're talking about the 1940s, the 1950s, when you still have this racism, you still have this view. Despite World War II, you still have the European officials. And if you do the extra credit, the Battle of Algiers, it's a really good movie that gives you a view into how European officials and soldiers behaved in Algeria. Okay? It's a good movie. Again, it presents a very complex independence movement in Algeria. All right, keep that in mind. So again, in the colonies, these are the tiers you tend to have. European officials, middle groups composed of Europeanized Africans in Africa, Europeanized Asians in Asian colonies. Okay? So in African colonies, so keep that in mind. And then C, the poor, unassimilated Africans, unassimilated Asians, okay? Or Asians that don't have this European education. And this European education can also be in institutions like the army. For example, if they fought in World War II as colonial troops, that's not we don't think of that as an education. We think, oh, college. But serving in a colonial army does teach a large number of people. They do obtain lower level leadership positions. They do learn the language, English, French. Okay, so that is another type of education that people in the middle groups have, and they're going to lead the independence movements because they know the weaknesses of the home countries. So let's start with India first, okay? In India, from the 1920s to the 1930s, you're going to have certain strategies, again, to push the British into granting. And by India, right now, I'm talking about a very large area that includes what is now Pakistan and what is now Bangladesh and what is now India, okay? So a much larger area because that was British India. All right, so these are the strategies they're going to try. They're going to boycott British textiles, and they're going to buy Indian textiles. Okay, the women are going to promote female roles, traditional female roles in India, and individuals will also promote nationalism among Hindus and Muslims in the different castes. Okay. Now, there's definitely a problem in these colonies, okay? Because European ideologies and rhetoric are different for citizens of their home countries and colonized peoples in their colonies, all right? In the home country, we've seen these liberal values: freedom of religion, enlightenment thought, material progress, free trade, and so on. But in the colony, you're definitely going to have racism, exploitation, and poverty. Okay? Even the people in the middle groups will see that there's a ceiling above which they can't go. Okay? There's a ceiling for them. They can see it. they're educated, many in European institutions like the army, or in European public schools, and European led schools and universities. All right, and these Europeanized leaders like Gandhi, like Nkrumah, like Ho Chi Minh, at first they're going to want the expansion of individual rights within the colonies they live in, whether this is Ghana, Vietnam, or India. Okay, they want the creation of nation states eventually. Okay, again, they received they went to European schools, universities, or they served in European institutions like the army, so they know some of these ideas. Okay, and they're definitely going to have trouble with native customs sometimes because they are Europeanized. All right, so sometimes they won't be able to communicate with people in the countryside who are less Europeanized or not Europeanized, and who have customs that are different from people in the cities. So there's going to be a divide between the cities and the countryside in these colonies. So in 1957, Ghana is going to become independent from Great Britain, and one of the leaders who's going to eventually become a president is Kwame Nkrumah. And again, he's one of these people in the middle groups. He receives a Western education, okay? He went to a Catholic elementary school, okay? Then he transferred to a teaching school. And after that, he spent 10 years in the U.S. studying economics and sociology at an American university, okay? He's very educated in European thought. And again, so he and others who are part of his network, again, are going to be the ones that push Great Britain into granting Ghana independence. And they're going to become the leaders of Ghana. But again, and this is something he said. So he said it because he knew this is Matthew 6:33, Gospel of Matthew. And in the Gospel of Matthew, the saying is, "But seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you." Okay, that's the Bible. But look at what he wrote. Okay, he wrote after inspiration from Matthew 6:33, "Seek ye first the political kingdom, and all these other things will be added unto you." Okay, look at how he's speaking. Okay, who is his audience for this? His own people? Definitely. Okay, he's speaking to his people because his people in the cities, they know the Bible. Okay, and so he's turning that around. And what he means by the political kingdom, all these ideas, individual rights, nation state, a nation state for the people of Ghana. Okay, so him and others, so you see how he's saying what he said, okay, reflects his Western education. Okay, the church is another institution where, again, these people in the middle groups become Europeanized, okay, and come to understand these different concepts of individual rights, okay, free trade, and so on. But again, there's definitely going to be a divide between the countryside, which will maintain traditional thoughts and beliefs, and the cities, which are more Europeanized because of these people who live there, these more Europeanized Africans, in this case, Ghanaians. I think that's how you say it. All right? So keep that in mind. Now I want to go to India. Okay? So again, colonial India included Bangladesh and Pakistan. Okay? So colonial India is going to become independent by 1947, and then in 1971, and it's going to be divided in two in 1947. Okay, so you're going to have India, which will have a Hindu majority, and Pakistan, which in 1947 is this part, and this part. But because it's very difficult to have a nation state separated like this, in 1971, Bangladesh will become its own country in 1971. Okay, so that's what's going to happen. This is the long path before that happened. Okay, so you have the creation of this elite party, the Indian National Congress. Okay, so these elites, again, these middle groups, they're elites. Excuse me, but they're elites when compared to other people from this region. But remember, they're commanded by European political and economic leaders. All right, but they want to push for more control, so they create this elite-led party. Okay, composed of English-educated Indians. Again, these people in the middle group. All right. Now, after World War I, they'll start to appeal to the masses. Okay, and one of the reasons they start to appeal to the masses is due to the leadership of this young Indian who's trained in law, who has a law degree, and his name is Mahatma Gandhi. Okay, and he is from the merchant caste, and he's going to study law in England. Okay, so he's going to go to law school in England. He definitely experiences. So Gandhi is going to get a law degree in London, but he has trouble finding a job. Again, racism. And so what he does is he goes to another place, another part of the British Empire, South Africa. And he's going to spend from 1893 to 1915 in South Africa after his law degree. Okay? And what he's going to do is he's going to live under apartheid. Now, South Africa was a complex colony. You're going to have different groups. You're going to have the Afrikaners in South Africa. This was the Dutch population that was conquered by England. Okay, so the Dutch population. You're going to have English officials. You're going to have people from India who are Muslim. Okay, Muslim Indians. And what Gandhi will do is he'll try to find ways to help out these fellow Indians who happen to be Muslim. He is Hindu, okay? But he'll try to help these Muslim Indians in South Africa to obtain more rights in South Africa, in this apartheid government of South Africa. And that's where he's going to develop this concept of satyagraha, this truth force, this confrontational but nonviolent approach to political action. Okay? So things like hunger strikes, things like different kinds of protests, okay? Nonviolent. Again, South Africa, you do have apartheid in South Africa. These Muslim Indians were brought in as a labor force, and there were a large number of Muslim Indians in South Africa, and so Gandhi finds a job and a kind of calling in organizing these Muslim Indians. Okay? And so that's where he does a lot of the learning, and the strategies that he learns in South Africa, he's going to bring to India, and he's going to push the Indian National Congress. He's one of the leaders. He's not the only one, but he's one of the leaders that pushes the Indian National Congress to begin to appeal to the masses, to stop being just an elite party. Okay? And they're going to start, again, to have these different types of protests. Okay? Nonviolent protests to gain independence from Great Britain. Okay? And they will gain independence in 1947. But Gandhi wanted a united India that included Muslims and Hindus, but partly due to nationalism, that's not going to work out. Okay, And so what's going to end up happening is there's going to be a lot of deaths once they gain independence, as there's a large movement of peoples. Indian Muslims will move to Pakistan or Bangladesh. And Indian Hindus will move from Pakistan or Bangladesh to India. And there's still this disputed area. Okay, notice how it encompasses both India and Pakistan. So there's definitely going to be a lot of bloodshed due to nationalism between Muslim Indians and Hindu Indians. Okay, and the Muslim Indians again will create their own country. Pakistan, 1947, and this country cannot remain viable, is separated by India. So in 1971, this country, which had been Pakistan, becomes Bangladesh. Okay? And this is tied to nationalism. This was Gandhi said this. A flag is a necessity for all nations. Millions have died for it. It is no doubt a kind of idolatry which would be a sin to destroy, for a flag represents an ideal. The unfurling of the Union Jack, the British flag, evokes in the English breast sentiments whose strength it is difficult to measure. The stars and stripes mean a world to the Americans. The star in the crescent, Pakistan, this one, Pakistan, will call forth the best bravery in Islam. Okay? So again, think about, he's very educated. He has a law degree. He understands British society. Okay, and he's one of the leaders. Okay, and this is what I mentioned. Colonial India will become India-Pakistan, 1947. And there's going to be a movement of, I would say, millions of people back and forth. Muslims will move out of India. Hindus will move out of the area of Pakistan and Bangladesh. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about Vietnam. Vietnam is unified in 1972. Okay, so he's their main leader, Ho Chi Minh. Think of his education. He went to the National Academy of Vietnam. Okay, again, he learned French at the National Academy, but he sees the hypocrisy. How in these European books there's mention of individual rights, the nation state, nationalism, and all these concepts which don't apply to his people. Okay, so he's going to be expelled for protesting the French occupation, the French leadership of Vietnam, and he's going to join a French steamer. And in the French steamer, he gets a certain education. He travels to Africa, the U.S., and Great Britain. And in 1919, he's going to be there at the Versailles Treaty. He's not a leader. In fact, I think he was one of the waiters there. So he's not a leader, but he's going to find ways to gain an education. He's a smart individual, and he's going to be crucial in the forming of a communist party in 1920 in Vietnam. And 1923, he's going to go to Moscow, because Moscow is going to have these meetings for communists. Okay, we've talked about this before. Okay, remember, Russia became the Soviet Union 1919, and they're going to host again communist leaders from around the world, promoting this idea of the education of the working class, the proletariat. Okay, so he's getting educated in these different ways of thinking. Okay, so he fits right in. He's one of these middle groups that want access to more power for themselves and for their country. Okay, now I know he's communist, but again, think about what you read in his work. Okay, and who he favors and who inspired him. All right. So 1930, he's going to found the Indo-Chinese Communist Party. Okay. So sorry, in 1920 he joined the Communist Party. Then he's going to go to Moscow. Then he's going to found the Indo-Chinese Communist Party. Okay, so at this time he was living in France, so he's going to join the Communist Party in France. All right. Then in 1930, he's going to be one of the founders of the Indo-Chinese Communist Party. And in 1940, he's going to found this League for the Independence of Vietnam. Okay, from the French. So these are his words. He's quoting in 1945. All men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Who's the original writer of this? Who's the original writer of this? Thomas Jefferson. And here he's being quoted by Ho Chi Minh. Are you surprised? Now look at what he continues. This immortal statement was made in the Declaration of Independence of the United States of America in 1776. Now, if we enlarge the sphere of our thoughts, this statement conveys another meaning. All the people of the earth are equal from birth. All the people have a right to live, to be happy, and free. Is this the case for the people of Vietnam as a French colony? It's not. Okay? Now, he's gonna run across the Truman Doctrine. Remember the Truman Doctrine, okay? To assist any nation struggling against communism in order to contain communism, right? Assist any nation. And so the U.S. is gonna assist the French as they try to control their colony against these freedom fighters or terrorists. Okay? Again, freedom fighters or terrorists. From the Vietnamese perspective, they're freedom fighters. Okay? They want independence. They want their own nation state. Some of the leaders are definitely pushing for communism. All right? Including Ho Chi Minh. By 1954, they're going to defeat the French. And Vietnam will be divided in half. Okay? So the North will be led by a communist government. The South will be led by more of a dictatorship. Okay? So I wouldn't say it's democratic. Now, Ho Chi Minh and the Communist Party in the North, they want to conquer South Vietnam. Okay? So they're going to start sending troops, the Viet Cong, to infiltrate and attack South Vietnam. And again, as part of this policy of containment, which is outgrowth of the Truman Doctrine, the U.S. will begin to send troops to reinforce the South Vietnamese government. Okay, and so we're going to have the Vietnam War from 1959 to 1973. Okay, again, to contain communism. Remember what I mentioned about the U.S. and the fear of communism that they have. They think that China and the Soviet Union are united. They are not. Okay, so when they see that this North Vietnamese Communist Party and the North Vietnamese are trying to conquer South Vietnam, they're going to send troops to prevent this, to support that government. And the U.S. is going to win most of the battles, but they're definitely going to lose the war. Okay, because due to a poor strategy and due to increasing pressure from people in the U.S., the U.S. will begin to withdraw its troops, beginning in 1969 and ending in 1973. And by themselves, the South Vietnamese cannot stop the North Vietnamese. The North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong. Those are two separate forces. Okay. All right, so those are three examples of decolonization. Okay, Kwame Nkrumah and people within his network pushing for independence in Ghana. Again, they're part of that middle level, Europeanized Ghanaians. Okay, then you have in India, you have, so that's Kwame Nkrumah. And then in India, you have Gandhi and the Indian National Congress pushing for independence. Okay, organizing nonviolent protests, and they're going to get independence in 1947. But again, there's going to be an exchange of populations, Hindu and Muslim populations. So British India will become 3 countries eventually: India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. Okay, and then finally you have a French colony. Okay, Indochina. Now I want to talk a little bit about civil rights. So civil rights in the U.S., it is a black-led movement. Okay, it is a black-led movement. And let's go back in time to the 1800s. The category white. In the 1800s, white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant. And again, race is an artificial construct. Okay, you guys, it's an artificial construct. So that's why in the 1800s, Catholics were not considered white, except for Maryland. Maryland is one exception, but in other states they were not considered white. Okay, and the non-white population included African Americans, Chinese, Irish, Italian, Mexican, Native Americans. Okay. Now, after the 1930s, you're going to have Italians and people who are of Italian and Irish descent begin to enter the white category. Okay, and part of it was these groups wanted to be part of the white category. An example of this is Italians pushing for this Columbus holiday, which was enacted in 1934. This is a way of them saying well, we're white too. We helped colonize the Americas. That's why they tie it into Columbus. Okay? And then we see again the Irish 1960s, when a Catholic president is elected for the first time in history, in U.S. history. JFK, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, he's of Irish descent. Okay, so by the 1930s, these two groups, Italian and Irish descent people, become included. Now, anti-black racism from the 1800s to the 1900s, in most of the U.S., except for the West, which was influenced by the Latin American ways of viewing race, you tend to have this one-drop rule. Okay, if you have African features, you're considered black. Okay, and in the U.S. South, from the 1800s to the 1900s, until emancipation, at the end of the Civil War, people who have African features are always suspected of being slaves in the South, and even in the North before the Civil War. Okay, but in the 1800s to the 1900s, we saw that in Jamaica and Haiti, literate Africans lead revolts, and so that's why in the South, people of African descent, African slaves, are prohibited from learning how to read, and it's a crime to teach a slave how to read. All right, and after the Civil War, we get the 13th and 14th Amendments, and that's when citizenship is defined it's defined to be anybody born in the U.S. is a citizen. Okay. Now, Latin American racism is different. It's really wealth, appearance, and education versus African and indigenous features. For example, I'm relatively lighter skinned, but if I was lighter skinned, but my family was wealthy, I would dress more European I would have dressed more European. I would have spoken Spanish the way the elite spoke Spanish. Okay, so I would be considered. I could pass as an elite. Okay, because of all these other features, which would overcome my indigenous features. Okay, if I was darker skinned. All right. Uh, I did my DNA. I'm 40% indigenous, 53% European descent. Okay, so in the West, you tend to have more this idea of this caste system, even in places like Louisiana, where you have certain categories like quadroon, for example. So Louisiana is kind of a mixture. In the city, in New Orleans, you're going to have kind of like a bit of a clash between these two racial hierarchies, these different white supremacist systems. All right. Now, the African American migration occurs in two steps: between 1915 and 1940, and between 1940 and 1970. Okay. Notice 1915, soon after, before the U.S. entered World War I, and then after World War I and during the Great Depression. How did people of African descent know to migrate to these different regions? Arizona, California, Oregon, Washington, the Midwest up here, Colorado. How did they know? Part of the answer is these porters, these African American porters. Okay. So the one who hired them, Pullman, he hired them because he had the stereotypes of African American men as being docile and servant. Because of slavery, they had these qualities. That's what he thought, and he could pay them less. So he starts having these porters in these special trains, not trains, but these railroad cars. Okay, so he starts having these porters. Pullman hires them. He can pay African American men less than white men. So that's why one of the reasons why he hires them. And he also has a stereotype of African American men as being more servant-like, having more servant qualities than a white man. Okay, so again, for these two, he does pay them less than he would have paid white men, but the wages are higher than most other African American men. Okay, so they're gonna attend wealthy white customers in these different sleeping cars. These white customers who are traveling from city to city for business or other reasons, for business or pleasure. Okay, and so they're gonna be, these porters are gonna be servants to these wealthier white Americans. Okay, so they're gonna gain more. They're gonna have more income than most African American men, and they're gonna travel to different parts of the U.S. in these railroads. Okay, so they gain this knowledge about the best places for African Americans. And in the West, the kind of racism that exists in the West, it's better for African Americans. The region is more multi-ethnic. Okay, the racism is still there, but there are more opportunities for African American families, and so they're going to tell their families and their loved ones, their extended families, and that's part of the reason why you have this great migration of African Americans from the South to the North, to the Midwest, and to the West. Okay? Not only that, but they're going to unionize. And they're also going to begin the civil rights movement. Okay? This is Edgar D. Nixon. He's leader of the Porters Union. in Montgomery, Alabama. And he's going to begin this Montgomery bus boycott after what happens to Rosa Parks. Okay, after she's arrested for not giving up her seat for a white man. And he's going to appoint a young up-and-coming minister named Martin Luther King to organize this boycott. Okay, so again, we don't learn as much about these porters, who, again, they had these definitely demeaning occupations, but they did earn relatively more than most other African American men. Okay, and they, along with returning service members from the U.S. Army, they're going to form part of this leadership, okay, for the civil rights movement, and they're going to sponsor an up-and-coming minister named Martin Luther King. Okay, if you want to know more about them, I learned about this information at this website. Okay, so again, think about how porters, African American men in the military, they gain an education, they interact, they become small unit leaders who are going to use these leadership qualities to lead the civil rights movement. Okay, they're going to support pastors, okay, who become the face of the movement. But it wasn't just pastors that were promoting the civil rights movement. You have many other groups, okay? And we get to the present, and black women who began Black Lives Matter, okay? And again, the aim of Black Lives Matter, the different chapters, the aim is to shine a light on police brutality against African Americans. All right. I know other people have tried to hijack the message. I was at UCLA. I heard them speak. I heard the LA chapter speak, and they're not interested in violence. It's a non-violent movement who wants to shine a light on police abuses against African Americans. All right, and that concludes my lecture. Thank you very much, and I'll see you tomorrow.